Today I'll show you a dramatic movie from 2013 called The Railway Man. The movie starts with a character named Eric, sitting in a coffee shop with his friends. Eric recalls a previous Thursday incident, in which he learned that the Manchester-Edinburgh train was delayed. He then decides to catch another train, at Crewe to catch the Manchester-Edinburgh train at Carstairs. Eric meets a lady named Patty on the train. They begin their conversation with one another and eventually grow to enjoy each other's company. When Eric arrives at his destination, he is forced to admit the unthinkable: he has fallen in love with her. Back in the present, Eric walks out of the coffee shop and heads toward the train platform, hoping to see Patty again. Fortunately, he locates Patty and approaches her. He claims it to be just a coincidence. Patty is also pleased to meet Eric again. After that, he invites her to his home. Eventually, they fall in love with each other and get married. One morning, Eric has a bad dream. In the dream, he encounters a Japanese soldier who transports him to a Japanese prisoner camp, where many other British soldiers are imprisoned. The Japanese soldiers are taking him into a dimly lit room. When Eric notices the room, he screams in distress and refuses to go inside. In reality, he cries out in agony as he lies down in his room. When Patty witnesses this, she gets worried. As a result, Patty attempts to talk to Eric about it several times, but he refuses to share anything. However, Eric is frequently disturbed by his memories of the past. Following this, Eric appears to be lost and depressed at all times. One day, Patty visits Eric's close friend Finley to learn more about Eric's past. Finley initially refuses to reveal the truth, but Patty persuades him to do so. The action then shifts to a flashback of Singapore in 1942 AD. During World War II, Eric appears to have been a British soldier assigned to duty in Singapore. They soon learned that their General Percival has decided to negotiate with the Japanese and call a ceasefire. As a result, Japanese soldiers seized the British Empire and transported all British soldiers to a Japanese prison camp. They see the other British soldiers treated brutally as enslaved people in the camp. Following that, the Japanese forced the British soldiers to work for them. However, they conclude that they will be unable to escape from the prison-like evil place. Eric reveals that he has found out where they are. He had been drawing the map of the place, and by the layout of the current place, he shares that they are currently in Thailand, the place where the Japanese are attempting to build a railway track connecting Thailand and Burma, resulting in long train rides. According to Eric, building a railway is difficult and unpleasant, so low-wage immigrant laborers typically perform it. He claims the journey to Burma is hundreds of miles long through mountains and jungles. He also realizes they are now Japanese army enslaved people forced to build the railway track. However, their leader Thorlby is not ready to give up, so they decide to make a radio to gather their required information. Eric is the only one who knows how to build a radio. As a result, they secretly begin gathering the necessary materials to make a radio. Meanwhile, Eric uses his mini-map to track their location and hides the map inside a bamboo. A few days later, Eric successfully makes a radio with which they retrieve information about the British Army's current position in the world. They learn that the British Army is bombing Germany 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that the U.S. Air Force has joined them. Following that, Eric, along with Major York, the other British high-ranked soldier, informs the other team of the news. Unfortunately, the Japanese soldiers learn about the radio and begin to look for it. They quickly locate the radio as well as Eric's mini-map. For this reason, 4 British soldiers, Thor by Finley Woodhens and Eric, are suspected. The Japanese soldier then brutally beats Woodhens until he collapses. Subsequently, Eric surrenders to save the rest of his friends' lives, so that they do not get tortured like Woodhens, who died right in front of his eyes. As a result, the Japanese beat Eric brutally until his body parts got severely injured. Finley and the other soldiers do everything to treat Eric's fracture. Despite this, they are aware that the battle is far from over. Later, a Japanese secret police officer named Kempentai shows up and threatens Eric to reveal the truth. The Japanese police suspect Eric of attempting to leak their information to the British Army despite the fracture in Eric's hand. Kempentai ties Eric's hand with a rope with its other end ties in the car and drags him outside. Then they transport Eric from the Japanese prisoner camp. Back in the present, Patty is stunned to hear all of this. Finley advises her not to discuss it with Eric. Afterward, Patty tries to give Eric extra attention and affection to comfort him. Eric, on the other hand, is unable to forget his past. The next day, Patty goes to Finley's house, and Finley hands her a newspaper magazine with a picture of Kempentai. Finley then requests Patty's permission to show it to her husband. After she agrees, Finley shows Eric the magazine. He also reveals that Kempentai is still alive and working as a tourist guide in Thailand. Finley then advises Eric to travel to Thailand and track down Kempentai to exact their vengeance, but because Eric now has a family and Patty means everything to him, he refuses to the revenge with Kempentai. Finley also questions him about what the Japanese soldiers did to him while imprisoned, but he does not reveal anything. After that, Eric and Patty accompany Finley to the station. Before leaving, Finley informs Patty that he will send a message to Eric that he will not be able to ignore. Finley, like Eric, appears to be suffering from depression and trauma, so he gets off the train at Warminster and hangs himself from a bridge. In the next scene, Eric decides to travel to Thailand to exact vengeance on behalf of all British soldiers. After the funeral of his beloved friend Finley, he goes to the Japanese prisoner camp, where he was tortured during the World War. Eric finds that the camp has now been turned into a museum. When he enters the museum, he finds exact replicas of the soldiers forced to work hard to build a railway track. Eric also notices Kempentai guiding the tourists through war-related incidents. Kempentai explains that he is from Japan, and that this is his 57th pilgrimage. After the tourists leave, Eric approaches Kempentai. At first, Kempentai does not recognize him, but soon he does in the flashback. Eric and Kempentai are in the same prison room, where Kempentai is interrogating Eric. Kempentai asks Eric why he is drawing the map to which Eric responds that he is a railway enthusiast. Eric is, however, accused of leaking railway information to the Chinese. Eric tries to persuade them that it is a receiver and that he cannot send any messages using a receiver, but they do not listen to him. After this, the Japanese place him in a small wooden cage, and he is not given anything to eat. Eric is brutally tortured to answer their questions, but he knows nothing else, and daily sticks to the same answer. Back in the present, Eric interrogates Kempentai in the same manner as he was being done in the past. Kempentai now appears to have a gentle and peaceful personality instead of before. Eric wonders how Kempentai survived even after the British Army defeated the Japanese. The film returns to a flashback scene where the British Army defeats the Japanese. The British Army lined up all of the Japanese soldiers who were about to be punished. Simultaneously, Kempentai impersonates himself and introduces himself as a translator who speaks Japanese and English. Because the British Army required a translator, he was free from his obligation and punishment. In the present, Kempentai reports that he witnessed many people being killed and buried. As a result, he decided to work for reconciliation, because he did not want the people to forget the tragedy of war. Eric is furious when he hears this, because he believes it is a crime rather than a tragedy. He also accuses Kempentai of being a liar and a criminal, following that Eric grabs and breaks the same stick used to beat them. He also discovers a block used to break a victim's hand in the war. Eric then asks Kempentai to place his hand on it too, which Kempentai quietly agrees Eric cannot do the same as he suffered back then because it violates his ethics. To exact his vengeance, Eric places the knife into Kempentai's neck and places him in the same small wooden cage. Eric heads to the dark room. In the next scene where the Japanese bound and tortured him, he recalls a flashback in which the Japanese soldiers brutally choked him with a water pipe inside his mouth. Remembering all those, Eric still cries out in terror, recalling his worst nightmares. He then returns to Kemputai and speaks with him. Eric reveals that his mother died while he was in the war, and throughout the war, he was writing letters to a dead woman. Kemputai then responds that the Japanese government lied to them about winning the war and being honored. Only Eric, he claims, told them the truth, that Japan was being overpowered by the British. Subsequently, Eric reveals Finley's final words, that he wanted to meet Kemputai and end all of this. Despite this, Kemputai is ready to die because he knows what he did was a crime and is guilty. Eric realizes Kemputai also lives a resentful and depressed life, so he abandons him. He then walks along the same railway track where he used to be forced to work. He throws away the knife in his hand and then returns home. Patty is happy to see Eric. She claims that she was scared after Finley's death because she feared the same might happen to Eric. Eric responds that Finley's case was unique because he lacked a caring partner like Patty. A few days later, Eric receives a letter from Kemputai in which Kemputai expresses his guilt. He also admits that what he did during the war was a crime, and he now regrets it all. He mentions that he always remembered Eric after the end of the war. After reading the letter, Eric decides to return to Thailand, bringing Patty with him. When they arrive, they are approached by Kemputai, who bows his head and apologizes to Eric. Following that, Eric gives Kemputai a letter in which he expresses his complete forgiveness towards Kemputai for the past. Eric also admires Kemputai's work of reconciliation. He adds, sometimes hating has to be stopped. After reading the letter, Kemputai sobs in tears and expresses gratitude to Eric. Patty also appears to be relieved to see this. As a result, Eric and Kemputai became close friends, and remained so until Kemputai died in 2011. Eric also passed away in October 2012 at the age of 93. With Patty by his side, as is how it ended. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more video like this. Movie Lovers Recap.